Okay, now we're going to get into using and customizing your start menu. So your start button is over here in the bottom left corner typically. There's two ways to access it. First, you can just press it, that's fine. But you can also use the start button on your keyboard, and this might be useful for some shortcuts later, so you should know it's there. It's usually down in the bottom left part of your computer keyboard, and it looks like a little Windows flag. So it looks just like your start menu, and it's usually between Control and Alt or Function, somewhere in the bottom left. So if you click on that on your keyboard, it will open your start menu. From your start menu, there's quite a few different sections that I want you to look at. The first is this little section over here on the left side, and if you put your mouse over it, you'll see that it kind of expands out and you get some extra information. Over here is your application list, and over here are your tiles. And so what we're going to talk about now is kind of customizing this whole area here. The first quick tip that I want to show you guys is how to resize this whole area. So depending on how many applications you need on a regular basis, you may want to have more or less available here. You'll notice that my cursor changes to this double arrow on the top and on the side. And what that basically shows is that I can actually resize this start menu just as simply as moving the edges. It will only go in groups of two, so I couldn't like leave it there and have a small little section there. So it's going to be one whole group or two whole groups or so on. So if you had more, you could go longer. And however you leave it, that's how it will appear the next time. So for me, I prefer it in this kind of shape and position, but it's up to you. Now getting in and customizing your start settings, you're going to need to go into the settings menu. And that is available from many different places. So we're going to go through this later when we talk about Windows settings, but for now we can just press this little gear icon here. And then once you're there, you can just start typing start, S-T-A-R-T. And then you'll see start settings, and that'll bring you here. The first one is show more tiles on start. I'll just quickly show you what this looks like and what this changes. So right now, you'll see I have 4 columns of tiles here. 1, 2, 3, 4. If I disable this, I actually only get 3 columns there. And so it's a little bit narrower, but for some people they might like this. Now, then if you move it, of course it's just going to be 2 groups of 3 columns. I prefer to have more tiles available, so I'm going to leave it with 4, and of course now that I've reset this, I have to reposition all of my helpful icons. And I'm position this back the way I typically use it and like it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to show the apps list, yes or no. And so this just basically disables or enables that apps list on the left. If you prefer to disable that, you can still access that apps list by clicking on this little icon that will appear, all apps, and then you can still see all your apps from there. And switch back to the tiles by clicking on this. For me, I just prefer to have all of that available together so I don't have to spend extra clicks. The next is you have this recently added apps list, and so that will basically add this section up here, recently added. And so any kind of applications that you've installed recently will show up there, and that might be a useful trick. Excuse me. If you're new to Windows or you're not so familiar with computers, show suggestions occasionally in Start might be something that you want to consider enabling. It'll just give you helpful tips and tricks from Microsoft on how to use their computers. This is something that I turn off because I don't typically need their advice. Use Start in full screen. This is another option that you can enable if you like, although this is not something that I enjoy. If you do this, your start menu will do this. So everything will disappear and you'll just get this kind of grayed out whole giant start menu. If you don't click on something, you just click on start again to close it. I don't enjoy that, so I'm going to turn that off. And then you can also enable recently opened item in jumps list on the start and the taskbar in File Explorer Quick Access. And this basically just means that any files or folders that you've recently opened will kind of show up in the kind of recently opened area here, as well as on your taskbar. It'll kind of retain recently opened files within each application's jump list. A jump list is when you click on an item and you see all of these available applications. So this is a jump list. And while we're here, since I think I skipped this before, if you want to pin an application that you're working on, you can click on this little symbol to pin it to the top of that list. And now every time I right-click this, that will always be pinned there. And it's just a nice quick shortcut to open quickly a file that I'm working on a lot. Okay, going back to your start menu, there's a few other things that we can go through. So that brings you through the settings of how you'd like to customize your start menu. But then this one is very important. Choose which folders appear on start. And so if I click on this button, it's going to bring me to this little list. And it's basically just an off and on switch. And these are just the shortcuts that will appear in this left side of your start menu. So for me, I like my user folder, which in this case is FIF admin, but for you it'll show up as your username. And then all the classic documents, downloads, music, pictures, videos, personal folder, and file explorer will always be there. I've got mine set up like this, which is I find most useful. I don't really need the network drive because I typically don't have my computer accessed on a network, but that's up to you. Okay, we can close the start menu settings now, and I'll go through some other customizations with start, and this is just rearranging this whole menu. So first of all, as mentioned before, if you want to add an application to the start menu, you simply right-click it from your programs list and click Pin to start. When you pin new programs, they will always kind of appear at the bottom in a new group, and you'll see these are kind of grouped by sections, right? So if I was to right-click this, and let's find something that isn't pinned, so Pin to start, it'll appear down there in this new group. If you hover in that empty space, you're able to name that group, so let's call this one Adobe. And I'll put my Adobe apps by long clicking and just dragging into that group. And you'll see that everything kind of shifts itself around as I'm dragging these things around. It's a little bit finicky sometimes, but it's fairly straightforward once you get the hang of it. Another thing to note is that these whole groups can be moved as one. So if I just grab Adobe, I can actually bring that whole group above the other group. So you can customize this as you see fit. You can grab it from anywhere on the top, including these little white lines. If you want to rename it, you can just kind of click in there to rename it again. So that's kind of one way to kind of customize your start. And so, for example, for me, I like my kind of home applications to be just basic things that I might access on a day-to-day basis. I really like my calculator being in that top corner because I can very easily access it. If I don't have a keyboard shortcut for it, I just press the start button and boom, I know it's going to be right there in the top right corner. So you can customize this as you see fit. Another thing to note is that some of these tiles can be resized. So if you right-click on a tile, there's a resize option. So typically you'll have 4 options: small, medium, wide, and large. So small looks like this. And again, you'll see as I move it around, it's kind of shifting tiles around it. So you can kind of experiment with this and get the hang of how it works. I don't find the small ones to be that useful for displaying information because, as you can see, it really struggles to display very much information. Certain applications will go live, which means they'll connect to the internet and display live information. For example, the weather app, except for some reason it's showing me Washington, D.C. weather. And then other ones will just be static. So typically your application icons will just be static icons that don't move around. Another thing to note is that you can also group these icons. So if I was to take these Adobe icons and just kind of put them on top of each other, you'll see that icon back there kind of expands at a certain point. When it does that, if I let go, I've created this little mini folder within Adobe. And I can click on that to either open or expand it. And I can put more applications in there like so. I can also put more applications in there when that folder is expanded. I can just drag... Oops, no, I cannot do that. No, you cannot just drag folders into it from an expanded thing. If you click on something else, you need to drag it onto this folder. See, I learned something new as well. So there you go. So if you wanted Adobe for some reason to have a bunch of extra applications on the side, so for example, maybe you want your major applications to be out, so like so. Maybe I'm going to use that one and this one a lot, but then these other little weird Adobe applications and behind the scenes applications, maybe those ones I'm just going to leave in this little folder that I'm going to access by clicking on that little down arrow. This is not something that I use, but it's an available trick if you want it. And it looks like you can even name those subfolders. To get them out, you just drag them out. It's very easy. And once you've dragged them all out, that folder will kind of disappear. You might need to do some arranging after you've taken them all out. Okay, so that pretty much sums up the start menu. I think I've covered everything. One last little trick is that you can actually uninstall programs directly from the start menu now. This is a new feature. We'll go through in more detail adding and removing programs at a later point, but it's just nice to know that for some of these programs you can actually just right-click and uninstall straight from there. And it will either just uninstall it directly or it will take you to the uninstallation folder. All right, I think that sums it for Start Menu. And in terms of the colors that you're seeing here, we're going to go through that when we get into desktop, themes and backgrounds, which maybe we'll do next. Okay, see you in the next one.